Drones lighting up the sky in Bamako to mark Mali's independence, projecting the faces of junta leaders and commanders, hailed as heroes on state television. Rights groups describe them as war criminals accused of atrocities against civilians.
3 African nations, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, have shaken global justice by quitting the International Criminal Court. This move challenges long-standing power dynamics, questions fairness in international law, and signals a bold stand for sovereignty. Why are they leaving now? And what could this mean for Africa's future? What the ICC is and why it matters. The International Criminal Court, also known as ICC, is a permanent judicial body established in 2002 to prosecute individuals for genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and aggression. Based on The Hague, it acts when national courts fail to bring justice. Its mission is to hold powerful leaders accountable and protect civilians from mass atrocities. The ICC plays a vital role in promoting global justice, deterring future abuses, and supporting victims through legal recognition. More than 120 countries have joined, giving the court international reach. However, the ICC's power depends on states' cooperation to arrest suspects and share evidence. For countries affected by conflict, the ICC represents an external authority capable of investigating crimes governments may ignore or hide. Its significance lies in enforcing international law beyond borders and giving victims a chance to see accountability on a global stage. Overview of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger's decision. In 2024, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger officially announced their withdrawal from the International Criminal Court. This historic step means they will no longer recognize the ICC's authority to investigate or prosecute alleged crimes committed on their territories after the exit takes effect. The 3 nations frame their decision as an act of sovereignty, arguing that global institutions should not dictate how African nations handle justice. Their withdrawal followed months of tension with Western countries and increased regional cooperation under new military-led governments. By leaving, these states signaled a desire to establish their own judicial mechanisms rather than rely on international oversight. The move also reflects a broader shift in African geopolitics, where several governments are pushing back against external influence. It has sparked concern among human rights organizations, which fear weakened accountability and limited protection for victims of serious abuses. Historical relationship between African nations and the ICC. Since its founding, the ICC has had a complicated relationship with African countries. Many nations in Africa were early supporters and ratified the Rome Statute, believing the court would provide justice for victims of mass atrocities. In its early years, the ICC focused heavily on African conflicts, investigating crimes in places like Sudan, Uganda, the Central African Republic, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. While some praised these efforts for addressing impunity, others criticized the court for allegedly targeting African leaders disproportionately while ignoring abuses in powerful non-member states. Over time, resentment grew as several African heads of state, including Omar al-Bashir of Sudan and Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya, faced ICC investigations. The African Union has repeatedly debated mass withdrawal from the ICC, viewing it as biased. The recent moves by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger show that this decades-long distrust is now reshaping Africa's legal alignment. Reasons given by the 3 countries for leaving. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have justified their ICC withdrawal by emphasizing national sovereignty, political independence, and the need to control their own justice systems. Their leaders argue that the ICC undermines local courts and interferes with efforts to build African-led solutions for security and governance. Another reason is the belief that the ICC serves Western political agendas rather than impartial justice. The countries also cited the lack of support they received during violent crimes, such as terrorist insurgencies and regional instability, claiming the ICC failed to protect victims or strengthen peace. Additionally, they want to avoid external investigations into actions by their military governments, especially as these regimes consolidate power. By exiting, they hope to pursue alternative regional mechanisms for accountability, reflecting a broader push across Africa to reduce dependence on global institutions perceived as imbalanced and politically driven. Accusations of bias against African leaders. A central criticism fueling the withdrawal is the ICC's alleged bias against African leaders. Since its creation, most of the court's high-profile cases have targeted African heads of state or rebel leaders, while conflicts in powerful nations have gone unpunished. Critics argue that this selective justice reflects global inequality, where Western-backed interventions shape which crimes are investigated. For example, indictments against Sudan's Omar al-Bashir and Kenya's Uhuru Kenyatta created a perception that African sovereignty was under attack. Meanwhile, alleged war crimes in places like Iraq or Afghanistan involving major powers faced slower or limited action. This perceived double standard has eroded trust across the continent. Leaders in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger cite these patterns as evidence the ICC unfairly targets Africa, reinforcing their decision to abandon a court they believe no longer represents neutral, global justice but rather geopolitical interests. Impact of political instability and military coups on the decision. The decision by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger is closely tied to recent political upheavals and military coups in the region. All three nations experienced leadership changes through armed takeovers, which disrupted their democratic systems and increased tension with Western allies. These governments face internal challenges, including armed insurgencies, weak state institutions, and public frustration with foreign influence. By rejecting the ICC, military rulers can shield themselves from possible prosecutions for human rights violations committed during crackdowns or counterinsurgency operations. Additionally, political instability fuels a desire for self-determination as these regimes seek to redefine national identity and reject outside control. Regional cooperation through alliances like the Alliance of Sahel States further supports this path, promoting shared defense and judicial independence from international oversight. Regional alliances and the Sahel's push for sovereignty, the withdrawal from the ICC aligns with a growing regional alliance among Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, known as the Alliance of Sahel States, also known as AES. This coalition, created after a series of military takeovers, seeks to reduce foreign influence and strengthen collective security in the Sahel. The AES promotes sovereignty, mutual defense, and regional solutions to political crises. By rejecting ICC jurisdiction, these nations aim to build African-led legal mechanisms that reflect their unique security challenges, including terrorism and cross-border insurgencies. Their cooperation shows a shift toward independent governance, prioritizing local control over justice instead of relying on Western-backed frameworks. This movement is not only about politics, but also about creating a sense of shared identity among states that have long faced external pressure. Potential legal consequences for ongoing investigations. Leaving the ICC has significant legal implications for Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. While withdrawal stops the court from opening new investigations after the exit date, it does not cancel cases already under review. Any existing proceedings tied to crimes committed before withdrawal can continue. This creates uncertainty for military leaders or officials who may face allegations of war crimes or human rights abuse during conflicts. Without ICC oversight, future violations could go unpunished if domestic courts fail to act. Additionally, cooperation agreements between these states and the ICC, such as sharing evidence or arresting suspects, will end, potentially hindering justice for victims. Legal experts warn that this retreat could create safe havens for perpetrators and weaken the global fight against impunity. How this move could influence other African nations. The decision by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger may inspire other African nations frustrated with the ICC to reconsider their membership. The African Union has previously debated a mass exit, claiming the court unfairly targets the continent. Countries with tense relations with Western powers, such as Eritrea or Sudan, could see this as an example of reclaiming judicial independence. Nations with military-led governments or ongoing conflicts might also feel emboldened to reject external scrutiny. However, some African states that value international justice for protecting civilians may resist this trend, fearing it would leave victims vulnerable. The move creates a test case. If the withdrawing countries maintain stability and avoid international isolation, others could follow. Future of international justice and the ICC's credibility. The withdrawal of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger raises urgent questions about the future of international justice and the ICC's credibility. The court already faces criticism for lacking enforcement power, relying on member states to arrest suspects and share evidence. Losing members weakens its global reach and signals declining confidence in its impartiality. If more countries follow, the ICC could become a marginal institution with limited influence outside supportive regions. At the same time, the crisis may push the ICC to reform, addressing claims of bias and improving engagement with nations that feel alienated. Advocates argue that strengthening regional courts could complement, rather than replace, the ICC's mission. The coming years will determine whether the ICC adapts to regain trust, or whether growing resistance, especially from Africa, reshapes the landscape of global accountability forever. The exit of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger from the ICC marks a turning point for global justice and African sovereignty. Will other nations follow? Stay informed, question the power behind international law, and share your thoughts below. Subscribe for more deep dives into world-shaping decisions and their impact. Thanks for watching.